Hello, I'm Brian Sethurst in Los Angeles.
And I'm Alison Norrington in London, and welcome to the Story Hour.
Be sure to like, feel free to comment, and subscribe to the channel. The Story Hour sits at the intersection of storytelling and technology. We bring you the story behind the stories, how it's written, how it's produced, how it's distributed, and even the personal stories behind the storytellers themselves.
We talk with the master writers, producers, directors, authors, and technologists, covering it all from film and television to literature, virtual and augmented reality, and more, as well as the innovations in production technology and distribution that are changing the how of storytelling.
Our guest tonight is an American screenwriter, producer, and playwright. He co wrote the 2013 Tom Cruise movie Oblivion and The November Man, featuring Pierce Brosnan.
He was the showrunner for the first season of Netflix's Stranger Things, was hired as showrunner for the second season of Amazon's series about Zelda Fitzgerald. I would call it Z, the beginning of everything. You guys would probably call it Z, the beginning of everything. And is the co-creator of the TV series Last Resort with Sean Ryan. He landed his first job in television as a story editor on the second season of the Showtime series Dead Like Me, and also wrote the film Trespass. His screenplay, The Last Days of American Crime, is an action thriller film based on a 2009 graphic novel of the same name.
With a vast and impressive career in film, television, and theater, our guest sold his original science fiction epic Courage to 20th Century Fox, where it caught the attention of director Matthew Vaughan, who became attached to direct. The partnership led him to co-write with Vaughn the script for a prequel in Matthew Vaughn's The Kingsman franchise. We are thrilled to welcome our guest, Karl Gadjusek. Welcome, Karl.
Hi.
Hey, Karl, thank you for joining us. You have written across so many different platforms. Like, I'm fascinated by how much you've done. And if I've done my research right, you started off as a playwright in a theatre group. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
that used to be an original thing to say, but now it seems more, especially in TV, it's more common to see people coming from theater. But yeah, I came out of the theater and then shortly, well, all the way through early career and into grad school, and then after that, had to make some choices about which way I was going to go. And we could tell the whole story if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to know. I mean, really, like you say, for to start off in theatre and move into television, and you had to make these choices of where you wanted to go, I would actually love to know more about that.
Well, what was so interesting was coming out of grad school in the 90s. You're looking around the country at what's being made and trying to figure out what speaks to you. And I had always been a theater person. I love the intimacy of theater. I love everything about the storytelling of theater. I love the long form of the scenes. I love the character development, all the stuff that theater is sort of famous for. But coming out of grad school in the 90s, I suppose, I was looking around American theater and I was enjoying it, but it was going through a particularly naturalistic phase. At the same time, this is like when Quentin Tarantino is bursting out and
Right.
doing, and we've got natural born killers on the scene, and I'm just watching movies and going like, God, I want to make that. So I got confused as a result.
Right.
Um, and so I just, it's funny because, yeah, of course, moving from the theater career to the film TV career, there's a financial element, there's a stability to that, but it really wasn't the driving force. I was young enough not to care yet. I mean, I grew to care, but I didn't care back then. And and so I kind of hooked up with some people who knew something about it. And the master playwright and screenwriter Jose Rivera had tutored me and helped me write a screenplay. So I brought it up to LA, kicked it around, and managed to stumble through a bunch of hooks and crooks into an agent, and started, and then started a time of 10 years perhaps of trying to run both careers until slowly and now at this point, I really do film and TV as my primary career. And the theater thing, which I love and I'm involved with and I go to and my wife is heavily involved in, is something I've got on hold, at least for now.
Yeah,
I,
right.
I want to ask because, and Allison and I were talking about this earlier. So, in theater, it's the playwright that has the power. In television, it's the showrunner that has the power.
Yeah.
And in film, it's the director that has the power. So effectively, collaboration between elements, like it is fundamentally different. I mean, the one thing I had said to Allison earlier, what I love about producing virtual reality is that the power actually does go back to the writer because they're like designing the entire experience. But how being able to shift those roles, you must be an amazing collaborator. I was, when I was reading everything, I was like, oh, this must be a really chill guy who's able to balance the power that you have to balance in each of these mediums.
Yeah, there's so much to say about this that we're just gonna have to stay on this for about an hour. Okay. So first of all, it should be said that everything is changing. Now, traditionally, you're of course right. In film, traditionally, the director has the power, at least on the creative side of creatives, and is the last word on things. And in TV, traditionally, the writer slash showrunner creator has that privilege. And that's been true for a long time, and actually was the reason I segued into TV. And we can talk about I just done Oblivion with Cruise when I moved into TV, and Oblivion was a really good experience. So it wasn't like I was like, I hate features, I got to go over to TV. But I was spooked by realizing the power dynamics. And but before we go down that road of history, it's also worth mentioning that, of course, it's all changing, right? I mean, TV is changing so much. So now you've got every single director who you might call a feature director with their hooks into some piece of TV, right? And so when David Fincher is your director on your TV show, who's got the power is no longer clear, right? Like that whole thing about like, oh yeah, I'm the showrunner, so I just tell directors what to do, which may have been true in network television 10 years ago, is no longer true, right? When David Fincher is your director, you are at best in a negotiation, right? So, and that's not to say anything against David. That's just to say like he's an incredible artist and has a whole bunch of power and would not presume just to be like dictated to. So, to the collaboration thing, yeah, that goes back to the theater question, which you said, Allison. I come out of theater, which is a collaborative medium. The power in theater exists. Don't get me wrong, it's totally exists, but it is sort of in this funny sharing thing where the director might have it in a production, but the script is sacrosanct, so the writer has it too. So there's necessary collaboration. So this is a long way of saying contemporary television no longer has any rules because it's so varied. Now, going back to the thing though that you were pointing towards, when I finished work on Oblivion, I came back to my wife one day and she said, how's it going? I said, well, it's great. It's really cool. I said, though, there's a part of me that recognizes that I am the fourth opinion in the room and, an important one, but like Cruise and Joe, the director, Joe Kosinski, and then Donna, who was running Universal. Those are the first three opinions, right? And so in some ways, I was recognizing that the role of a talented studio feature writer is massively collaborative, but also it's an assembly role. Can you take those three often radically divergent opinions, add your own opinion, and come up with a mix which ideally makes everyone ecstatically happy, or at least doesn't offend anyone too much, right? And at the same time I was making that realization, I had been in conversation with Sean Ryan for years, sort of casually, like, hey, I love your work so much. I admire you so much. I wish we could do something. Yeah, great. Let's do something. But it was around that time I went to Sean very, very seriously and sort of said, Sean, I would really, truly love to work with you and I will do what it takes. And he was like, well, bring me an idea. And so unlike in previous iterations where it was sort of a nicety, I really, went to work and elbow grease and all that and brought him several fully fleshed out ideas. And we made a show together and that was a network show. And so that was a reversal where all of a sudden Sean and I were we were the showrunner creators of a network show or of any show back in that day are the vision of the show. They get the final edit and they decide and they're responsible for what it looks like and how it feels, which is what a director does in a feature film. Anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but
the whole fact that things are changing. I want to talk about the business side and then we'll talk about the story side. Because it started, actually, my feeling is it started in Britain with these limited series, like where suddenly it was an artiste, the director was in charge, the writer, director, and suddenly you had a short form series. And then all of a sudden comes in Netflix, the whole financial structure of royalties and traditional payments and all that shifts and changes. but there also was a methodology, like you get a different director for a television pilot than you would within the series, because certain directors had abilities to direct a pilot so that it would be picked up. Is that now gone too? And you just say, okay, we're selling this to Netflix, or we're selling this to Hulu or Amazon or whoever is going to be the distributor, and we're going right to series. And so we're choosing a director for the entire series, or are you choosing multiple directors within the series whose work you know?
Well, that's sorry, we had an audio thing, but I think I got your thing. Um, so now you're touching upon something really interesting, which is in deep flux, which is that so with boutique shows or any kind of show which is looking at the 6 to 10 episode range, where in theory a single director could pull them all off, and several have, then the discussion of the one director idea comes up. The problem is it is grueling, and the ones who have done it have approached suicide, and it's not cool to even just six, even like 6 hours directing ask any director if they feel like directing a 6 hour movie without a break. I mean, it's too much. And so, but you do want that one vision more now, more than ever, now that TV is so elevated. And so unless you are on the most high concept, easy sale, like I want to do a procedural in the sort of CBS procedural model. But if you're doing anything elevated, you're going to want to bring on an actor and a director and all their vision and all their talent as you set the thing up. Because even though there's so much TV, the Netflixes and the Amazons of the world can still command, and Apple even more, can command they can command, they want it all before they say yes. And so you're bringing on a director, the director who often is a film director these days, or has made their bones in film, has strong vision. The old model would be they'd put the vision on and then step away, and then a bunch of other directors would sort of mimic the vision. Now, more often, the question is, well, how many can this director direct, and what do we do about the ones they can't direct? And that's the conversation we're all having. That's what happened in Stranger Things with the Duffers. The Duffers were definitely going to direct all the episodes, and then wisely we're like, you know what? Let's hand some off to Sean Levy the first season, which is a wise move. It just kept sanity. And the same thing with the series I'm working on right now, where I have this wonderful director, and she says I want to direct all the episodes, and I'm like, there are technical reasons we're going to suffer if you direct all episodes. We're going to be working on some cross-boarded fourth episode, and we're going to have some location across town that needs to be scouted, and no one's going to be there to scout it. Like the very practical stuff of making television is going to be hard. And so we talk a lot about the primary director bringing on maybe just one other director and putting them and there's a conversation about, do we put them on the ground full time? If it's 8 episodes, do we move them to wherever we're shooting and have them both on the ground and pay for that extra amount to have them there the whole time so they can just cross-pollinate, right? In some ways that's expensive. In other ways, it saves on flying multiple directors all around the world.
This reminds me of like Greg Berlanti's methodology, showrunner Berlanti, because what he would do was within the first year and a half of a series, or first 2 years, he would make sure that everyone that was writing on the series, everyone that was in that writer's room, knew what the vision was, knew who the characters were, had them more or less take possession of those characters so he could leave the show and go create something else. And frankly, I mean, I don't think the average person can tell, but if I'm watching a series, even on Netflix, and it goes slightly this way or this way in terms of, I can tell it's a different director.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel it. So when you say mimic, I mean, I think what you're now talking about is maybe there's this cadre, if you will, of directors that begin to know what the vision is of the creator and the showrunner, and yet still is able to add their vision. Maybe the first 2 directors add their vision, and then the other directors just have to follow along. It's fascinating, actually, to think, to maintain the level of integrity of a story world and the characters in the hands of different directors.
That used to be the definition of a television director, or most of them. The definition used to be this incredibly talented person who had, like a writer in a writer's room, who had the ability to come onto a show that they were not familiar with, quickly learn the aesthetic, and deliver an episode that both was inside the aesthetic of the show, yet also had their own special sauce that that director brought. And that combination was just what we called a TV director. Now, more and more, we look for auteur qualities and certain, as things get more boutique, there's more auteurness. But still, that is essentially, for a writer and a director, it's the essential job of TV when you're talking multiple episodes and where it can't just be one or two people. And, that's true. By the way, you're talking about Berlanti with the writers. It used to be almost universal that television shows, with some exceptions, but mostly would get their writers onto set and teach them how to produce those shows and bring them up through the system. And there was always a writer on the set, if not the showrunner, who had the knowledge you're talking about, long arc knowledge, tone knowledge. That continues to be true to some degree, but again, with the weird things we do now where we write all these episodes and then everyone takes a 9-month break and then we go shoot them, those writers may go off and have another job by that point. So it gets funnier that way too.
That's conversations that Brian and I have had before about maintaining the integrity, though, and that kind of need for the team around you that has the same vision. But then even when you said, you're kind of in the room and you're maybe the fourth opinion in the room, then you've got the situation of deciding what you defend and deciding what you let go, like when it's your story, your script. And I think as a writer, that's always that's almost a decision you need to make, I feel, before you step in the room. These are the bits I need to keep, and these are the bits why I need to keep them, and then to maybe negotiate others. How do you find that process?
Oh, painful. Look, you're not, in theory, if you have the privilege of walking into those rooms, it's a privilege and it's great, and you're not being asked into those rooms or paid to be in those rooms to be a pushover. That wouldn't help anyone. Which is tricky because when you're dealing with huge, powerful egos, the tendency is to almost want to be like, hey, it's cool. I'll just make it work, man. Like, yeah. I'll just, you want it blue and you want it green, I'll make it blue-green. And which works for a little while. But what happens is if you do that too much, about 3 weeks into that, people go, it feels soupy and lame. We don't like it anymore.
Right.
And then you want to get outraged and say, well, wait a second, I just did all the stuff you said to do. It's your fault. And they're like, no, it's kind of your fault. Like, you were the one, it's your job. Yeah. So that thing you're talking about holding your ground, it's not an ego thing. It's not about it's about, well, actually you said this. It's about knowing what is key so the story stays alive and whole.
Yep.
And if you bend on those pieces, the problem is, it's not that you can talk about artistic integrity if you want, but you're also just messing up.
Yeah.
Like, everyone's going to notice pretty soon.
Yep.
Then, because they're not going to like it anymore, and they're not going to know why they didn't like it. Yeah. But so
are you excited? Some people, when something is so fluid as the television industry is now, and as the film industry is now, I mean, you look at Disney, they completely restructured to support streaming. And so you look at these dynamic changes. One, the industry was, and this is my opinion, the industry had to change anyway because the entire industry was deficit financed, network television was suffering, so there had to be a change. Then COVID came along and it kind of forced the change. For some writers and some people who have been in television for a while, it's like a death knell, and they're locked and they can't move. But others, and I have a feeling you're like one of them, find this fluid dynamic very exciting and are able to be present enough to find their way through it and still maintain their integrity.
For me, it's so tricky. I mean, yes, the changes are fun and they are not troubling to me personally because I've always flirted back and forth between features and TV. I haven't taken overall deals. I haven't gotten locked into that way of doing things. And so I am somewhat nimble or somewhat unemployed, depending on how you want to look at it. But so that's fine. I worry. So that's the good part for me. I mean, for me, the whole things move to Zoom. It allows me to be different places. Allows me. I'm a family person. I value the time I spend with my family. So these changes are decent. Some of the things that are permanent may become permanent changes worry me quite a lot. Everyone has realized that you can do Zoom rooms. That's not. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry. Oh, okay. Someone just walked in the room. Everyone has realized you can do Zoom rooms, and that's not perhaps a good thing. We have the writers' room as an entity is this important thing, and now everyone's like, oh well, we can do it Zoom, so that's fine. We'll just do that. I'm worried that won't go back. People have also, the aesthetic that lies behind COVID production is something that's less expensive, and I hope doesn't become the norm also. We've got our Kingsman movie sitting in a can somewhere waiting to one day come out. That movie is meant for big screens, right? So that's rough, and I don't want the result to be that we only make movies for small screens, right?
Yeah.
There's so much.
Yeah.
There's just so much of what I want to say is, creators and writers, you're writing the future anyway. You are. And what's happening right now is forcing everybody to kind of reevaluate what they want to keep and what they want to let go of. And so I think Allison and I have talked about this, about the creative responsibility of the writer. And so we're going to close this week for now, but we're going to come back, and I really would like, given your body of work, I would really like to discuss when dystopian fiction actually turns into fact. Because as I said to Allison, any writer that had written the dystopia that we're now in, we never could have predicted that it would become reality. And there are things that you have included that we want to discuss with you, because maybe you are Asimov. Maybe you are predicting the future. Maybe this is something we should listen to. So
I have a project we can talk about, but maybe if you want to do it when we come back, that's fine.
Yes. Yeah. So we're going to close out this week, and we're going to welcome you back next week. We're all going to be dressed the same way because this is our dystopia. So Karl, thank you so much for being on this week's episode. Allison, thank you as always for being you. And we'll be back next week with the second part of our interview with Karl Gadjusek.